Hi everyone, it's me, Krylios, Team Rayceen Productions MC and producer. And joining me today is poet, author, performer, songwriter, Bettina Judd. How are you? And professor. How are you doing today, Bettina?
I'm well. How are you?
I am doing fabulous. I am doing fabulous. I am so glad to have you here with us. Could you go ahead and give our audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name is Bettina Judd. I write poetry. I paint and draw, and I write expository propositional prose. And I try to be a friend and a good daughter to my mother. I was born in Baltimore, raised in Southern California, and I now live in the Pacific Northwest, where
the Pacific
my job
Northwest
is at the University of Washington. Yes.
I love that. I love that. Now, tell me a little bit about your poetry and what inspires your poetry, and the type of things you write about in your poetry.
It changes. My obsessions change from time to time.
Tell me about that transition, how you write from
Right.
then till now. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think when I was a younger poet, still a young poet, I, like many people, wrote about their love life, particularly when it was in terrible shape. About kind of the political moment of the day. I was a part of the Spelman College Jazz Ensemble when I was at Spelman. And, Joe Jennings, the leader, our professor, allowed me to share my political poetry in that kind of framework. So I have that kind of performance hybrid history to my poetry. And then once I started to be more serious about writing poetry on the page, I got interested in my various kind of research obsessions. And so my first book is about the legacy of medical experimentation on Black women. It's called Patient. Then I find myself in these other kind of obsessions. And for instance, one of the book projects that I'm working on is about mitochondrial Eve, the idea of the first woman, or the oldest mother, the oldest shared ancestor that we all have. And so kind of looking at the research around who this kind of theoretical, universal human mother is, and then also kind of our attachments to the idea of such a woman and the fact that she's likely African, a dark-skinned African, right?
Yes.
So that's like another obsession of mine.
Listen, I love that obsession. I love that obsession. And I've done some reading on that too. And it's great to hear you talk about it because seeing it as something that you're going to look into and really research and really create something from is almost really exciting to me, because I will say, and I'll just bring it back a bit to the scientific racism that you brought up, because I didn't even know that was a thing until I started researching your work. I probably knew of it as a thing like very latently, like just, in the ether, but actually seeing the work. First of all, I did not know that gynecology, that's how it started. I did not know that. Shook me. That shook me. Tell me about that process and that research, and how it led to your poetry and how it led to putting these things out there for people to understand within your art, within the way you speak, within everything. Tell me about that, and when you discovered and came upon this and started researching, how that made you feel.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I understood latently, right? And I think
Yes.
that's a thing for a lot of Black people, like,
Yes.
you know, to have a mistrust of doctors, to know that, oh, they could be experimenting, oh, they could not be telling you the truth, all of those sorts of things. And when I myself had a terrible experience with a hospital, with a series of hospitals, and was asking myself why, attached to, and realizing, like, yes, I have all of these this kind of latent embedded knowledge as a Black person, that's ancestral knowledge, because there is this history here. That's also intuition and insight, because there's this present here that's attached to that history. And so when I went through my own medical kind of emergency in 2006, I knew from my own studies a bit about the history of gynecology, and I was more mesmerized at or compelled by the fact that I was thinking about history while I was in a very, very present, kind of physically violent moment. And that's just such a Black in America's experience, is to be in a moment where you're realizing it's kind of out of body. It's like this is just a replication of other moments, and it hurts because it's a replication of other moments. So that's kind of where the idea for the book came about, is about this kind of blending and replicating within the past and present, as it relates to medical experience, or Black women's experiences with medical racism.
Yes, my goodness. Listen, I learned so much from all of that. I was really, really, really taken aback. And so for me, it's so amazing that now you are on this new obsession. You're in with this new obsession, because I can't wait to see what really comes from that. But let's have a little talk about, your singing and performance and stuff like that. What got you into that?
Singing was my first instrument.
Ah.
My mother's classically trained. And so it was just in the house, mainly. Like, some of my first memories are singing with my mother in the car. She would drive very long distances. We would travel from, like, Baltimore to New York, and those long drives and short drives would be just singing, and her rehearsing some solo that she has. And so I can still kind of mimic some of her solos from that era of our relationship.
Yes.
So core, and some of my first memories of music were with her. So yeah, I mean, that's how I started. And then, I continue to try to be in that practice because it's so core to my creative spirit. And so some of my my poetry videos they actually incorporate some of that music and some of the chants that I create. And I hope to continue to expand that part of my creative practice, but that's where the music portion comes from. And of course, the performance overall comes from those earlier experiences with creation that have to do with singing in front of people and dancing in front of people as a kid. So yeah, that's really where the history of my own my own experience with
comes
performance.
From. So what inspires you when it comes to music? Is it the same thing that inspires you when it comes to poetry and research, or is it through a different lens that you kind of approach singing and performance?
I think it's different in the sense that I have less of a technical practice related to it. That's not entirely true, because my mother was classically trained. She's always in my ear about where I'm singing from and all of those sorts of things. But when it really comes down to, like, my today, use of voice, it's at its core very spiritual and can sometimes be nonsense. And so I think, and I don't think about research in the exact same way as I do with poetry. It's of course incorporated in some ways in terms of thinking about forms of music and like how I might be drawing from spirituals and the blues, but it's not couched in the same kind of obsessions, if that makes sense.
Yes, I get that. I like that too. Now tell me about how you focus these obsessions into the classroom as a professor. Tell me about that. How do you take these obsessions and these things that you are so enthralled with and bring them into the classroom and use that to impart knowledge onto your students?
What's really great about being a professor is that I do get these opportunities to teach whatever I want.
I imagine.
Right. And so it's, it's not always like, it's not always the kind of the coursework that is core to like the major or whatever. It's, you get to create courses that are prescient for the moment or the day. And so I have taught a course on medical narratives at the graduate level. So having students read novels and books of poetry that aren't even my own, that have to do with the legacy of medical racism and specifically the way in the Americas it's rooted in slavery and colonialism. And genocide, I get to have them read about these things from kind of a narrative perspective, from the perspective of the patient, and not just this kind of, and so that students who are coming to the material from a clinical point of view can understand what it means to center the human body, who's at the center of this kind of inquiry, right? I also get to teach like an undergrad course with that kind of lens, where we look at the whole legacy, not just of medicine, but of science as a whole, since the Enlightenment, and how the Enlightenment actually frames a lot of our racist notions, right? So we like learn about the Enlightenment as this beautiful time where mainly white people stop being superstitious and then they learn things, right? Like they learn things from like people in Africa and Aztecs and indigenous people have already
knew,
right, and already knew. But okay, y'all learned something. We learned that gravity is.
We're enlightened now.
You're enlightened, and then somehow in your quote unquote enlightenment, you discover this thing called race, which is something you created, right? And so we learn a bit about that as well. And so like I'm able to do that kind of work in my class, which is interesting because my own focus for my own research, my official research in gender, women, and sexuality studies has to do with creative production, right?
Yeah.
So it's about like the more meta questions about how does one produce knowledge through a painting or through the process of singing or through the process of writing a poem. And so I also get opportunities to teach Black feminist thought in that way.
Yes, I was just about to ask that, doing that through a womanist lens as well, a feminist and a womanist lens. And I'm sure the students must love that. So you look at things through the racial lens as well, but tell me about it through that womanist, that feminist lens as well. And even, the difference between womanism and feminism as well, because I'm sure that's something you probably touch on when you're speaking to your students.
Well, what's interesting about that as a concept is because I learned feminism as Black feminism. It was never an add-on. It's not like I was taught Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott and whatever white ladies did their thing in the 20th century. I didn't learn that as like a foundation for what feminism was. Like I learned it through the lens of Black women and then other women of color. And then like there was this kind of connection like, oh, white women was doing something they thought was right too. You know, like, and so when I'm talking about feminism, I am talking about Black feminism. I am talking about feminism. And so like that's the center of my own kind of world philosophies, as well as my educational philosophies, like how I teach, and then also my theoretical lenses. And anything else is kind of incorporated into it as a relationship. Like this is what Black feminists were thinking, and this is what white feminists were thinking over there. Which I think is usually the opposite of what, you know, students are generally taught, and some of my colleagues are even generally taught. And so that is, you know, that is absolutely core to everything that I'm teaching. So that like when I am teaching about, whether I'm teaching about medical racism or whether I'm teaching about visual art, Black feminist thought is the center.
Yes.
And womanist thought is the center of what I do. So
I love that. I love that. And you know, well, as the time is coming upon us, let the audience know how they can go ahead and find your book, how they can follow you, keep up with you, see what's the latest that's coming out. Please go ahead and do that.
Okay, great. You can go to www.bettinajud.com. That's my website, bettinajudd.com. And you can see all of the things that I've talked about here, and then also upcoming projects and projects that I've even forgotten about. Most recently, I won an award for Most Innovative Scholarship from the Journal Feminist Studies for my article, Sapphire's Praxis. You can also download that if you have institutional access, and if you can see ways to do it if you go to my website. Yeah, you can also follow me on all the socials. I'm on a fast right now. And it's at Bettina Judd, BettinajUdd, everywhere.
Thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure having this chat with you, Bettina. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Krylios.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And to our viewers, thank you for watching.